The stars had always called to humanity. For 300 years, they had answered that call, spreading across the darkness between worlds and building new homes among distant suns. By the year 2347, 12 star systems held human colonies. Miners pulled precious metals from asteroids. Farmers grew crops in domed habitats on worlds that had never known life. Scientists studied the mysteries of the universe from stations that floated in the endless void. It was a peaceful existence. The United Earth Coalition governed all of humanity with a gentle hand, focused on exploration and growth rather than conquest or war. Admiral Ben Carter commanded the defensive fleet from his station orbiting Earth, but his ships had never fired their weapons in anger. They existed to protect, to rescue, to patrol the shipping lanes and keep civilians safe from pirates and accidents. Ben was 62 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen many things, but never true war. He had served for 40 years, rising through the ranks during an era of peace. Some younger officers thought he was soft because he preferred diplomacy to conflict. They did not understand that his caution came from wisdom, not weakness. On the morning everything changed, Ben was reviewing supply reports in his office. The work was boring but necessary. He liked boring. Boring meant nobody was dying. His communications officer, a young woman named Lisa Morgan, interrupted him with news that would end the boring times forever. "Admiral, we have unidentified vessels entering the Sol system," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes showed concern. "They are not responding to our greeting signals." Ben set down his coffee and walked to the command center. The main screen showed a cluster of ships approaching from beyond the orbit of Neptune. They were large vessels, much bigger than anything humanity had built, with sharp angles and dark hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "How many?" Ben asked. 47 confirmed," Lisa replied, more appearing on long-range sensors. "Admiral, they're heading directly toward Mars Colony 7. Ben studied the alien ships with growing unease. In all of humanity's expansion across the stars, they had found bacteria, simple plants, and primitive animal life on various worlds. They had never encountered intelligent aliens. The universe had seemed empty of other minds until now. "Keep trying to establish communication," Ben ordered. "Send the standard first contact package. Mathematics, basic physics, offers of peaceful exchange." Lisa worked her console, sending signals across the void. Minutes passed. The alien fleet continued its approach without slowing or responding. Then a reply finally came. But it was not the kind Ben had hoped for. The lead alien vessel fired a beam of searing energy at Mars Colony 7. The shot struck the agricultural dome where 3,000 people were working, growing food for the colony. The dome shattered. The atmosphere rushed out into the vacuum. Bodies tumbled through the breach. Ben watched the footage in silence. Around him, his officers gasped and cursed and cried out in shock. He felt something cold settle in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before in his long career. "Get me Captain Nathan Cole," he said quietly. Nathan was Ben's chief strategist, a brilliant tactical mind who had spent decades planning for threats that had never materialized. He arrived on the command deck within minutes, his face pale as he reviewed the sensor data. "They killed civilians," Nathan said. "Without warning. Without any attempt at communication." "Yes," Ben replied. "This is an act of war." "Yes." Ben turned to Lisa. "Open a channel to the alien fleet. All frequencies." The channel opened. Ben took a slow breath and spoke in a voice that carried across the stars. "Attention unidentified vessels. I am Admiral Ben Carter of the United Earth Coalition. You have attacked a civilian installation and killed 3,000 innocent people. This act of aggression will not be tolerated. You are ordered to withdraw from our territory immediately." If you do not comply, you will face the consequences of your actions. This is your first and final warning." The response came quickly. A face appeared on the screen, though it was barely recognizable as a face. The creature had gray skin stretched tight over a skull-like head, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. When it spoke, the translation software needed several seconds to process the alien language. "I am Varax, the Unyielding, High Commander of the Varaki Empire. Your worlds now belong to us. Your species will serve the Empire or be destroyed. Resistance is foolish. Surrender, and some of you may be permitted to live as slaves." The transmission ended. Nathan stared at the blank screen. "They think we are going to surrender? They think we are weak," Ben said. "They see our small fleet. They see our focus on peace. They assume that means we cannot fight. Can we fight them, Admiral? Their ships are massive. We have never faced anything like this." Ben was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his grandchildren, who lived on Earth and knew nothing of war. He thought about the farmers on Mars Colony 7, who had woken up that morning, expecting an ordinary day, and instead had found death falling from the sky. He thought about all the peaceful years humanity had enjoyed, and how quickly peace could shatter. "Prepare the fleet," Ben said finally, "and send word to Earth. Tell the Council of Nations that we have made first contact with an alien species." "What else should I tell them?" Nathan asked. Ben's expression hardened. "Tell them the aliens are hostile. Tell them they have drawn first blood. And tell them that the warning has been delivered." He walked to the observation window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Varaki fleet was advancing toward Earth. Confident in their superiority, certain that humanity would crumble before them like all the other species they had conquered. They did not know what humanity truly was. They had not studied the long and bloody history of the human race, the endless wars fought on the home planet, the weapons developed and stockpiled and hidden away. They saw peaceful colonists and assumed that peace was all humanity knew. They were wrong. Ben Carter had spent his entire career hoping that the weapons his species had built in secret would never be needed. That hope had just died along with 3,000 people on Mars. The Varaki had made their choice. Soon they would learn what that choice would cost them. The week that followed the attack on Mars Colony 7 was filled with desperate attempts at peace. The United Earth Coalition did not want war. They had built their society on cooperation and mutual respect, on the belief that intelligent beings could solve their problems through words rather than weapons. Even after 3,000 deaths, they held on to that belief. Ambassador Julia Price was humanity's greatest negotiator. She was 54 years old, with silver streaks in her dark hair and a calm presence that had ended corporate disputes, settled territorial disagreements between colonies, and brought peace to situations that others had considered hopeless. When the coalition asked her to meet with the Varaki, she accepted without hesitation. "Someone has to try," she told her staff as she prepared for the journey. "War is easy. Peace is hard. That is why peace is worth fighting for." A neutral station was selected for the meeting, an abandoned mining platform in the asteroid belt that belonged to no one. Julia traveled there with a small team, carrying gifts and proposals and hope. The Varaki sent a single representative, a scarred warrior named Torek, who had conquered 12 species during his long career. They met in a cold room with metal walls and flickering lights. Julia offered her hand in greeting. Torek stared at it as if she had offered him garbage. "I am Ambassador Julia Price," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I represent the people of Earth and all human colonies. We are here to discuss peace." Torek made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Peace is for the weak. The Varaki do not make peace. We make subjects. Your forces attacked a civilian farming colony. 3,000 people died, including children. There was no warning, no declaration of war, no reason given. Surely you can understand why my people are upset. Your people are prey, Tarek replied. Prey does not get upset. Prey gets eaten. Julia took a slow breath. She had dealt with difficult people before, but this was something different. This was not a person who disagreed with her position. This was a person who did not view her as a person at all. The United Earth Coalition is prepared to be generous, she continued. We will overlook the attack on Mars Colony 7 if your empire withdraws from our territory. We will establish clear borders. We will even consider trade agreements that could benefit both our peoples. Torek leaned forward. His 4 eyes studied her like a predator studying its next meal. You speak as if you have something we want. You do not. We want your worlds, your resources, your people. We will take them because we are strong and you are weak. That is how the universe works. And if we resist, then you will suffer before you die, instead of simply dying. Julia realized that negotiation was impossible. The Varaki did not see humanity as equals to be reasoned with. They saw them as objects to be used and discarded. There was nothing she could offer that would change their minds because they already believed they were. Entitled to everything. She stood up from the table. I am authorized to deliver a final warning. If your fleet does not withdraw within 72 hours, the United Earth Coalition will respond with all available force. You will regret the day you came to our space. Torak showed his needle teeth in a grin. Threats from prey. How amusing. I will tell High Commander Verax that you made me laugh. He enjoys such entertainment. Julia left the station and returned to Earth. Her report was brief and honest. The Varaki were not interested in peace. They were not interested in negotiation. They wanted conquest, and they believed humanity was too weak to stop them. The 72 hours passed. The Varaki did not withdraw. Instead, they attacked again. Jupiter Station was a mining hub where 20,000 people worked, pulling metals and gases from the giant planet and its moons. Captain Kevin Drake commanded the defense force there. 20 small ships that were designed to chase away pirates, not fight alien warships. The Varaki sent 100 vessels. Kevin Drake was 38 years old. He had a wife back on Earth and 2 daughters he had not seen in 6 months. When he saw the enemy fleet approaching, he knew he was going to die. He also knew that running was not an option. All ships, this is Captain Drake, he announced over the fleet channel. The enemy outnumbers us 5-1. We cannot win this battle, but we can buy time for the evacuation shuttles to escape. Every minute we fight is another minute for civilians to reach safety. I will not order anyone to stay. This is volunteer only. Every ship stayed. The battle was brutal and short. Human vessels darted between the massive Varaki warships, firing weapons that barely scratched the enemy armor, drawing fire away from the fleeing evacuation shuttles. One by one, the defenders fell. Ships exploded. Crews died. Kevin Drake watched his fleet shrink from 20 to 10 to 5 to 2. His own ship took hit after hit. Systems failed. Fires spread. His crew fought to keep the vessel moving, even as it fell apart around them. The last evacuation shuttle reached safe distance. 12,000 civilians were going to survive. Kevin looked at his dying ship and then at the Varaki flagship, a massive vessel that commanded the enemy fleet. His engines were gone. His weapons were empty. He had only one thing left to give. All hands, abandon ship, he ordered. Then, when his crew was clear, he aimed his crippled vessel at the flagship and fired the emergency thrusters. The impact was tremendous. His ship struck the enemy flagship in its engine section, tearing through armor and detonating the fuel reserves. The massive vessel shuddered and went dark. Crippled beyond repair. Kevin Drake died in the explosion. So did thousands of Viraki warriors. On Earth, the Council of Nations received news of the battle. They saw footage of the tiny human ships fighting against impossible odds. They heard the final transmission from Captain Drake, a simple message he had recorded before his last charge. Tell my family I love them. Tell Earth to make them pay for what they have done. The vote was unanimous. The time for warnings had passed. Admiral Ben Carter received his orders and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they held a terrible determination. Activate the Prometheus Protocol, he said. It is time to show them what humanity really is. The Viraki Empire had conquered 40 species across the galaxy. They had a system for it. First, they would study their target from a distance, learning about their technology and military strength. Then they would strike suddenly, destroying key installations and killing enough people to spread fear. Finally, they would offer surrender terms that seemed generous compared to total destruction. It always worked. Weaker species would see the power of the Viraki and give up hope. They would bow their heads and accept chains rather than face extinction. The Empire had grown vast and powerful using this simple strategy. High Commander Varax had studied humanity before the invasion. He had watched their transmissions, analyzed their ship designs, and reviewed their history. What he saw was a species that talked endlessly about peace and cooperation. Their military was small, focused on defense rather than attack. They had no conquered peoples, no slave races, no history of galactic warfare. Varax concluded that humans were soft, peaceful, weak. He was about to discover how wrong he was. Commander Amy Sullivan had served in the Earth Defense Force for 15 years. For 10 of those years, she had commanded a squadron of ships that officially did not exist. They were called ghost ships, vessels built with technology so advanced that no sensor could detect them. They hid in bases scattered throughout the outer solar system, waiting for a threat that many people hoped would never come. The threat had come. Amy received her orders from Admiral Carter and gathered her pilots in the briefing room of their hidden base in the Kuiper Belt. 30 men and women looked at her with eager eyes. They had trained for years for this moment. The Viraki fleet is advancing toward Earth, Amy told them. They believe we are defenseless. They believe their victory is certain. They are wrong. She pulled up a map of the solar system on the display screen. Red dots showed the enemy fleet. Blue dots showed the supply convoy that followed behind them, carrying fuel and ammunition and everything the Viraki needed for their war. We are going to hit their supply line. Without supplies, their fleet cannot sustain operations. They will be forced to retreat or starve. We strike fast, we strike hard, and we disappear before they even know what happened. Her pilots smiled. They had been invisible for years, waiting in the dark. Now they would finally be seen, but only for the brief moment it took to deliver destruction. The ghost ships launched from their hidden base and slipped through space like shadows. Their hulls were coated with material that absorbed sensor signals. Their engines produced almost no heat signature. To the Viraki sensors, they simply did not exist. The supply convoy was defended by 20 warships, but those warships were watching for threats from the wrong direction. They expected attacks from Earth, not from the empty darkness behind them. Amy positioned her squadron perfectly. 30 ships surrounded the convoy in complete silence, invisible and deadly. All ships, she whispered over the secure channel. Fire. The night lit up with weapon fire. 30 streams of energy struck the supply vessels simultaneously. Cargo ships exploded. Fuel tankers burst into flame. Ammunition stores detonated in chains of fire that spread from ship to ship. The Viraki defenders tried to respond, but they could not find targets. Their sensors showed nothing. Their weapons had nothing to aim at. They fired blindly into space while their supply convoy burned around them. 90 seconds later, it was over. Every supply ship was destroyed or crippled. The Ghost Squadron vanished back into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared. Commander Varax received the news with disbelief. His supply line was gone. His intelligence had said nothing about human stealth technology. Where had these ships come from? How had they attacked without being detected? Before he could process this disaster, another report arrived. A new human fleet had appeared behind Mars, and these were not small defensive vessels. These were warships. Captain Ryan Torres commanded the heavy cruiser Defiance, the largest vessel humanity had ever built. It had been constructed in a secret shipyard inside a hollowed asteroid, assembled piece by piece over 20 years. Its armor was thick enough to withstand sustained enemy fire. Its weapons were powerful enough to crack a small moon. The Defiance was not alone. 50 ships flew with it, all of them built in secret, all of them ready for war. Ryan Torres was 45 years old, a quiet man who rarely raised his voice. He had spent his career preparing for a battle he hoped would never happen. Now that it was here, he felt strangely calm. All ships, form battle line, he ordered. Target their command vessels first. Cut off the head, and the body will fall. The battle group moved forward like a wave of steel and fire. The Varaki fleet turned to face them, confident in their superior numbers. They still had 300 ships against 50 human vessels, but numbers were not everything. The Defiance fired its main cannons, and the Varaki cruiser simply ceased to exist. The shot had punched through its shields, through its armor, and through its reactor, turning the entire ship into an expanding cloud of debris. The other human ships opened fire with similar results. The rocky vessels that had never been challenged found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. Human captains fought with desperate fury, knowing that their families were counting on them, knowing that failure meant slavery or death for everyone they loved. The battle lasted 3 hours. Ryan Torres led his ships through the enemy formation again and again, striking at command vessels and communication hubs, breaking the Varaki coordination. When enemy ships tried to retreat, human fighters chased them down. When enemy commanders tried to rally their forces, human weapons silenced them. When the firing finally stopped, half the Varaki invasion fleet was destroyed or disabled. The survivors fled toward the outer system. Their confidence shattered. High Commander Varax stared at the casualty reports and felt something he had not experienced in centuries of conquest: fear. He sent an emergency transmission to the Varaki homeworld. He requested reinforcements. He warned them that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had believed. The reply came quickly. The Grand Armada was coming. 500 of the Empire's most powerful warships would crush these upstart humans once and for all. Varax hoped it would be enough. For the first time in his long life, he was not certain of victory. The Grand Armada of the Varaki Empire was a legend among the stars. 500 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, crewed by millions of the Empire's finest warriors. This fleet had crushed rebellions, annihilated rival powers, and brought entire civilizations to their knees. In all its long history, it had never known defeat. When the Empire learned of the losses in human space, they did not send reinforcements. They sent a message. The Grand Armada would show these primitive creatures what happened to those who dared to resist. Admiral Ben Carter watched the enemy fleet enter the Sol system. The sensor displays showed a wall of red, so many ships that individual contacts blurred together into a single massive threat. His own fleet, even with all the secret vessels now revealed, numbered less than 100. "They want to end this with overwhelming force," observed Captain Nathan Cole, who stood beside him on the command deck. "They are not taking any chances. No, Ben agreed. They have learned that we are dangerous. They want to crush us before we can surprise them again. A door opened behind them, and Dr. Laura Kim entered the command center. She was 60 years old, with white hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that held the weight of terrible knowledge. For 30 years, she had led the team that developed humanity's last resort, a weapon so powerful that everyone hoped it would never be used. "Admiral," she said quietly, "the system is ready. We can deploy at your command." Ben did not respond immediately. He stared at the approaching enemy fleet and thought about what he was being asked to do. The weapon Dr. Kim had built would not just destroy ships. It would erase them from existence. Millions of lives, even enemy lives, would end in an instant. "Is there no other way?" he asked. "Our conventional forces cannot stop 500 ships," Nathan said. "Even with everything we have, we would be overwhelmed. They would reach Earth within days. And then? Then they would burn our cities, enslave our people, destroy everything we have built over 300 years of exploration and growth." Ben closed his eyes. He thought about his grandchildren again, their smiling faces, their innocent laughter. He thought about all the children on Earth who did not know that a fleet of conquerors was coming to destroy their future. "We gave them a warning," he said finally. "We told them what would happen if they continued." "Yes," Nathan confirmed. "They chose not to listen." Ben opened his eyes. The doubt was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Deploy the quantum field generators around our fleet. Wait for my signal to activate." Dr. Kim nodded and left to prepare her weapon. The Grand Armada advanced with arrogant confidence. High Admiral Varax the Unyielding commanded from his flagship, the largest vessel in the fleet, a ship so massive that it could have held a small city within its hull. He had taken personal control of this mission to redeem his earlier failures as the Armada approached Earth. Varax noticed something strange. The human defenders were not attacking. They were not even trying to run. They simply held position near their homeworld, as if waiting for something. "They have accepted their fate," one of his officers suggested. "They know they cannot win." "Perhaps," Varax replied. But something felt wrong. These humans had already shown themselves to be more cunning than expected. Why would they simply give up now? He ordered his fleet to slow its approach and proceeded with caution. Sensor sweeps showed nothing unusual. The human ships were just sitting there, weapons powered but not firing. Then a transmission came from the human flagship. Admiral Carter appeared on the screen, his face calm and expressionless. He did not look like a man who was about to be destroyed. He looked like a man who had already made a terrible decision and found peace with it. "High Admiral Varax," Carter said, "your empire was warned. You were told to withdraw. You were given every opportunity to choose peace. Instead, you chose to send your greatest fleet to conquer our world." "You cannot stop us," Varax replied. "We outnumber you 5-1. Surrender now, and perhaps some of your people will be spared." Carter shook his head slowly. "You still do not understand. We did not ask you to leave because we were afraid. We asked you to leave because we knew what we would have to do if you stayed. What you would have to do." Varax laughed. "What can you possibly do against the Grand Armada?" "Watch." The transmission ended. Varax opened his mouth to give the order to attack, but the words never left his throat. The space around his fleet began to glow. The quantum disruption field was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not fire projectiles or energy beams. It simply changed the rules of reality within its range. Molecules that had been bonded together for billions of years suddenly forgot how to hold together. Atoms drifted apart. Matter dissolved into nothing. The Grand Armada had no time to react. Ships did not explode. They simply stopped existing. Crew members did not die in fire or vacuum. They came apart at the most fundamental level, their bodies scattering into clouds of atoms that dispersed into the void. 500 ships. Millions of Veraki warriors. An empire's greatest military achievement, gone in less than a second. The quantum field collapsed, leaving behind empty space where an armada had been moments before. Not even wreckage remained. It was as if the fleet had never existed at all. Admiral Carter watched the empty space on his sensor display. Around him, his officers stood in stunned silence. They had known the weapon was powerful, but seeing it in action was something different entirely. "Record everything," Carter ordered quietly. "Make sure every sensor station in Veraki space receives the footage. Make sure every species they have conquered sees what happened here." The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every civilization under Veraki rule watched the footage. Every conquered people saw the greatest fleet in the galaxy erased from existence by a species the Veraki had dismissed as prey. The universe would never look at humanity the same way again. The throne room of the Veraki Emperor was a vast chamber carved from black stone, filled with statues of conquered enemies and banners from 100 defeated civilizations. For centuries, this room had witnessed only triumph. Defeated leaders had knelt before the throne and begged for mercy. Generals had presented treasures stolen from alien worlds. The empire had grown fat on conquest, and the throne room had been the heart of that dark glory. Now it was silent. Emperor Korthax the Eternal sat on his throne and stared at the holographic display before him. The footage played again and again, showing the grand armada surrounding Earth, confident and powerful, and then simply vanishing. 500 ships gone. Not destroyed in battle, not defeated through clever strategy, just erased from existence as if they had never been real. His advisors stood around him, waiting for orders. They expected rage. They expected him to demand vengeance, to order every remaining ship in the Empire to attack Earth and burn the human homeworld to ashes. Instead, the Emperor was quiet for a very long time. "Tell me about these humans," he finally said. The chief intelligence officer stepped forward, a nervous creature named Prothax, who had been responsible for the initial assessment that had labeled humanity as easy prey. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They are a young species, Emperor. They have only traveled the stars for 300 years. They have no conquered peoples, no slave races, no empire. They focused on exploration and trade rather than warfare. And yet they possess weapons that can destroy our greatest fleet in seconds. Yes, Emperor. Why? Why would a peaceful species build such terrible weapons?" Prothax hesitated. He had been asking himself the same question. "We examined their history more closely after the first defeats. They are a violent species, Emperor. Before they reached the stars, they fought countless wars among themselves. They developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet. They came very close to extinction through their own conflicts. And then they stopped. They built a unified government. They focused on cooperation instead of competition. They chose peace. The Emperor considered this. So they are a species that learned to control their violent nature. They did not lose it. They simply chose not to use it. Yes, Emperor. The weapons they used against our fleet were developed decades ago. They built them in secret and then hoped they would never need them. They were prepared for war while actively seeking peace." The Emperor made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. "We thought they were weak because they did not conquer. We were fools. They were not weak. They were restrained." He stood from his throne and walked to the window that overlooked the capital city. Billions of Veraki lived on this world, and countless more lived across the Empire. All of them depended on his decisions. "Send the message to Earth," he said. "Tell them we wish to negotiate. Ambassador Julia Price received the Viraki request with surprise. After everything that had happened, after all the death and destruction, she had expected the Empire to fight until the very end. The fact that they were asking for peace gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, this terrible chapter could finally close. 3 months later, she sat across from the Viraki delegation in the same cold room where she had first met Torek. The scarred warrior was not present this time. He had died aboard the flagship when the Grand Armada was destroyed. The new delegation was led by a diplomat named Sothax, who spoke with careful respect instead of arrogant contempt. The Viraki Empire offers these terms, Sothax said. We will withdraw all forces from human space permanently. We will pay full reparations for the colonies we attacked. We will acknowledge human territory and agree to respect your borders. Julia nodded slowly. These terms are acceptable, but we have additional conditions. Sothax's 4 eyes blinked nervously. What conditions? You will release every species you have conquered. All 40 of them. They will be given the choice to remain part of your empire voluntarily or to establish their own independent governments. Any who wish to leave will be provided with resources to rebuild their civilizations. The Viraki diplomat was silent for a long moment. This was not just surrender. This was the end of the empire itself. Centuries of conquest erased. 40 species freed. The Viraki would be reduced from galactic conquerors to just another civilization among many. If we refuse? Sothax asked quietly. Julia's expression did not change. Then this war continues. And you have seen what happens when we fight. The delegation asked for time to consult with their emperor. 2 days later, they returned with an answer. The emperor accepts all conditions. Admiral Ben Carter retired from service 1 month after the treaty was signed. He returned to his family home in the mountains of Montana, a small cabin beside a quiet lake where his grandfather had once taught him to fish. His grandchildren visited often, running through the forest and swimming in the cold water. Unaware of how close they had come to losing everything, Ben spent his remaining years teaching at the military academy, sharing his experience with young officers who would protect humanity for generations to come. His lessons always came back to the same simple points. Strength without wisdom is merely violence. Wisdom without strength is merely hope. You need both. The 40 species freed from Viraki rule formed their own coalition, and many chose to ally with Earth, not because humanity forced them, but because they had seen something remarkable. They had watched a peaceful civilization defend itself with terrible power, and then stop the moment the threat ended. They had witnessed strength combined with restraint, power combined with mercy. Throughout the galaxy, Earth gained a new reputation. Humans were not warriors, not conquerors, not predators seeking new prey. They were something more complicated and more dangerous. They were a species that would offer friendship first, that would seek peace before war, that would extend every opportunity for compromise and cooperation. But if those offers were rejected, if their people were threatened, if their homes were attacked, they would respond with force that could shatter empires. A phrase began to spread among the stars, passed from species to species as a warning and a tribute. Do not wake the humans. The Viraki learned this lesson too late. Others would be wise to learn it from their example. Humanity wanted peace. They hoped for friendship. They dreamed of a galaxy united in cooperation and mutual respect. But they kept their weapons ready, just in case. That was the human way.